I would like to begin by quoting John Cage and asking Max, Jake, and Erica to comment on it in any way they like. Max, Jake, and Erica. Okay, this is what Cage said. The first question I ask myself when something doesn't seem to be beautiful is, why do I think it's not beautiful? And very shortly, you discover that there is no reason. And I'll say it again while you guys are thinking about what you want to say, Max, Jake, and Erica. John Cage, the first question I ask myself when something doesn't seem to be beautiful is, why do I think it's not beautiful? And very shortly, you discover that there is no reason. Max McKenna, how wise is that? Do you align with that sentiment? And what does it have to do with what we're talking about this week?
I think I do align with that sentiment. I really love that. I love John Cage's little bits of wisdom that would make a perfect page-a-day calendar or something. But
are you commodifying John Cage already?
Hasn't he already been commodified?
Yeah, probably so.
There's this sort of like phenomenological self-observing thing that he's advocating, like thinking about your own thinking, or a sort of consciousness of consciousness. When you see something you find not beautiful, and then you try to watch yourself finding it not beautiful. It's a quite meta gesture, and it's I mean, it's a radically subjective position, and it's also very relative. It's very much about ideas of relativity, that there's no such thing as absolute beauty.
That's really great. So here we are in a week where the artists are trying hard to take as much of the ego out of art making as possible, and then Cage comes along and he runs right into the arms of subjectivity by saying beauty is not an objective standard, and all we have to do is think about why we think something's unbeautiful, and it becomes, or can become, beautiful. Pretty transformative, all in one. Jake, what do you think about that, Cage?
Yeah, I think one of Cage's greatest abilities is to recontextualize stuff, particularly like stuff that isn't beautiful or sounds like something else or is noise, I think this is what he's talking about here, and I'm just brought back to a moment some years ago when I went with a friend to hear like an experimental free jazz concert, and my friend said, "Well, that really sounded like people were just like kind of." They might as well have been dropping their instruments on the floor or something. Like this is really like so noisy and incoherent. And I said, well, what if you think about it as them trying to say something to each other? Like they're not trying to play a coherent melody. They're trying to talk through their instruments. And then all of a sudden, the perspective shifts and you start to see something as beautiful, like because the emotions are massive and incoherent, and if that's the context, then things begin to shift. And I think a lot of Cage's kind of experiments and statements have to do with that, and I think that also I agree with Max that this is where radical subjectivity comes in. Your state of attention gets altered, and then you begin to perceive things and to view them in a way that's kind of personal and recontextualized, and that's powerful.
Jake, I would submit that Cage is to us as you were to your friend at the concert. And the reason I say that is because you did a teaching thing. You framed it for your friend, as we often do in teaching difficult art or difficult poetry. We will often say things that just resituate things so you were teaching. Cage is teaching, and And this kind of suggests, other than suggesting that you and Cage are equally wise and guru-like, it also suggests that the act of reframing is explicit in your story, but is implicit in Cage, because it's not some random Uncle Schmo who comes up to you and has this thing to say about beauty. It's John Cage. And so it's already Cagean, if I may. So, what do you think about that? Cage is to us as you were to your friend. Your friend needed you to reframe it. Otherwise, he would have walked out and thought, why are they making this ugly noise? Am I right?
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. I think I was just above all, I wasn't trying to educate. I was kind of feeling bad for free jazz, and I wanted to have a good experience. So maybe like the feeling like feeling defensive of a genre that I loved,
Yeah.
kind of just made me want to articulate it in that way. I don't even know.
Yeah.
Like it feels true.
Yeah, but you were feeling bad about free jazz, which is a funny Marmer-esque thing to say. But actually, Cage was feeling bad about anything that we think of as unbeautiful in the world. And I think this connects the whole course. I think that when Williams was taking a break on in the back wings of the hospital and he saw some broken glass, I think he was feeling bad about a modern world that had been broken into fragments after World War I. He thought, I think I'm going to frame, not for my friend at the free jazz concert, but for all readers of modern poems, I'm going to frame this piece of shard, this glass, so that we can ask the Cagean question of it. What is to say that a broken glass bottle is not beautiful with the sun shining on it and life possibly to be derived from it? I mean, I think that's the entire gesture of Tender Buttons. These artists are framing things for us so that we can resituate beauty. Yeah, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Oh no, I just digging it. Like it sounds very Walter Benjamin. Like especially if you're talking about like language, like those little fragments, broken fragments of language that are suddenly like held up and are made beautiful.
Yeah, they were
mystical. You're going mystical on us.
The Arcades is not much more than a somewhat later and more postmodern version of what Williams was doing earlier. Erica, what are your thoughts?
It's almost like it's an ars poetica for Cage, like a statement of his poetics. Because what I think he points to is the fact that if we think carefully about the ways in which we direct our attention, as both Max and Jake were saying, the possibility of what we see when we look around us fundamentally changes. And I can't help but be reminded of a little story, if it's okay. It's very different than Jake's, but it's still a story where I was living in Berlin for a period of time a few years ago, and there's a piece by Cage up in this tiny little town in Germany called Halberstadt, and it's a piece that is meant to be performed over 637 years, and it's in a very old church. And I speak zero German, but I decided that I was going to figure out how to find my way to John Cage because I wanted to hear the composition, which it's also a piece that I think speaks to the quote that you read, because the notes don't change. I think they change every like 20 or so years.
I've heard of this, yeah.
Yeah, so it was incredible because I found myself in this church in the middle of nowhere in Germany with a lot of people kind of wandering around and looking for the show. And I couldn't communicate with them because we didn't speak the same language, but I could understand that they didn't understand how to point their attention in the convention of that space.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really like a hugely powerful moment to me because it was a moment in which I understood, or at least I think I understood, how Cage takes his work or his art and lives it in the moment. And that's something that I think is central to the aleatory writers that we're talking about this week, but also central to a certain ethos of ModPo. That, you know, this is stuff that we care really deeply about, and it becomes a part of how we move through the world.
So nice.